Hey there! I'm Sarah A. Chrisman, the author of the Tales of Chetzemoka, and today I'm going to tell you about an accessory that comes up pretty often in my books, the chatelaine. Chatelaines were really popular accessories for ladies in the Victorian era, and a lot of my characters have them. In First Wheel in Town, the clacking of Kitty's sewing tools on her chatelaine is one of the quintessentially feminine sounds that draws Doc to her. And then in Delivery Delayed, when Lizzie spends the night at Addie's house, she notices that after Addie changes out of her silk dress and into her wrapper, the chatelaine at her waist is her only ornament. Nurse McCoy's chatelaine is practically a superhero's tool belt, but we'll come back to that in a minute. First, an overview and a bit of background. A chatelaine is essentially a toolkit crossed with a charm bracelet. The most common ones in the Victorian era had a metal hook that tucked into a waistband or a belt, and from that hook hung different tools. The tools come off and they can be switched around or switched off with other tools. The chatelaine that I wear most of the time, and this one here, are both what would have been called pot metal. This was a really cheap and straightforward way of recycling metal. They would take whatever little bits of metal they had, and cheap metal. So this isn't something that would be done with gold or silver. This is cheap metal like nickel or tin. And they would throw it into a pot and then melt it down and pour it into molds for whatever shapes they wanted to make. And this was a very common way to make cheap little bits and bobs in the Victorian era. Now these are quite pretty, but they're not as valuable as some of the really fancy ones. Rich women might have chatelaines made out of gold or silver, but a more middle-class woman would have one made out of pot metal. And she might have a quite pretty one, like this one with Athena on it is probably, this is the sort that I think Addie would have. Because Addie likes pretty things, and she's also very into mythology. Now for a housekeeper, like Mary Bregan, she might have a steel chatelaine, which is a bit sturdier than the pot metal. The pot metal, because it's just an amalgam, it's not that strong. The steel is quite strong, and it's very utilitarian. Not as fancy as the other ones, because it doesn't have to be. This is just for use. And this is a very common type of chatelaine. This is a sewing chatelaine. So this has a thimble shaped like a bucket. It has a pair of scissors, which are absolutely necessary. It has a literal pin wheel, which is pretty fun. The pins go in the wheel. It has a little tube that could be for a pencil. It could be for needles. If you've got your pins in the pinwheel, you need your needles too. And then this would have originally held a tape measure. As far as my own chatelaine that I wear all the time goes, again the clip has Athena on it, and then I've got a pin cushion. I've got a Vesta. This is for matches for my lamps. Need to refill that. And I've got a notebook for taking down notes on things. Now, if I want to, I can trade off things. And the most common thing I trade off is the matchbook, because in summer I don't need that quite as often. And then I've got a pair of scissors. Those are pretty fun, that I can put on there where the match safe was. I've got a thimble that belonged to my husband's great-grandmother, and it fits in a little walnut-shaped thimble holder. So if I wanted to, I could change off the pins for that. And then I've got a pair of tweezers, because you never know when you might need tweezers. So if I wanted to, I could put those on there too then. Besides their obvious sewing uses, for a long time people used pins to hold papers together, the way staples get used in offices now. You'll notice that both my pincushion and my vesta are styled to look like books. Chatelaine tools could often be very decorative or fanciful, and the particular tools on a woman's chatelaine could often tell a person a lot about that woman's personality. I chose these particular tools because I'm a writer, so of course I love books. Traditions of waist-hung appendages go back at least to the Bronze Age and probably farther back than that. The waist is such a natural place to carry things, it seems likely humans carried tools and weapons there even in prehistoric times. The word chatelaine comes to us from medieval French. It's related to the French word chateau, or castle. Originally, the term chatelaine referred to the lady in charge of a castle. In those days, the mistress of a castle would carry all the keys related to the castle, for everything from doors to jewel chests to spice chests, in a bundle at her waist. These keys were a really potent symbol of her power as the lady of the castle. She was literally the one who held all the keys to every door. In Scandinavian countries, the traditional dress, still worn by women on special occasions, often has a little symbolic key to show women's power. In most of the world, though, as time moved on and it became more and more common for people who weren't of noble birth to carry keys of their own, some of the old symbolism of keys got lost. People weren't about to just give up on status symbols, though, and they found other things to take their place. In the 18th century, it was really popular for the upper classes to display elaborately jeweled watches hanging at their waists. By the Victorian era, fashions had changed, and watches moved mostly from the waist to higher up the torso. Men would generally tuck their watch into a vest pocket, with the chains anchoring the watch being the items on more prominent display. Some women carried their watches in pockets, and as watches became smaller, it also became possible for a woman to wear her watch on a brooch or a necklace. Some people did continue to wear their watches at their waists, like this nurse is doing, but because of changing fashions and more compact, higher-tech timekeeping technology, the waist was freed up for other accessories, and that's where the sort of chatelaines in my stories come in. In the most popular types of Victorian chatelaines, the old medieval keys were replaced by tools of various sorts. Some of the options for chatelaine tools in the 19th century included pens or mechanical pencils, perfume bottles, eyeglass cases, fans, coin holders, pocket knives, button hooks, just about anything you can think of. Knitters and crochet enthusiasts had a special type of chatelaine called a spool knave that would hold their thread for them. There were even special recreational chatelaines that would hold things like paint sets or tennis accessories, little pads you could write your score on. Those are just a few of the different things that could be on chatelaines. If you want to see a lot more, I highly recommend the book Chatelaines, Utility to Glorious Extravagance by Genevieve Cummins and Narilla D. Taunton. This is a fabulous book with a lot of amazing eye candy. It is unfortunately out of print, but your local library can probably get you a copy to borrow on interlibrary loan. And it is definitely well worth looking into because it is an amazing book. I promised that before we parted ways today, I'd tell you how Nurse McCoy's chatelaine resembles a superhero's tool belt, and that brings us to quite possibly the most impressive chatelaines of all, nursing chatelaines. This is a 19th century photograph, a carte de visite of a pair of nurses wearing They're proud in their uniforms, and a very important part of their uniforms are their chatelaines. Nursing chatelaines were a way for nurses to carry the most important tools of their trade with them at all times. Matches were used for lighting lamps, and that could mean not just kerosene lamps for lighting, but also alcohol-burning spirit lamps that might be used to heat up hot drinks or prepare certain medicines. Fragile glass thermometers would be carried in protective metal tubes, and pens or pencils would often be carried that way as well. Pins were essential for fastening bandages in place, and they would be held on a chatelaine for easy access. As a writer, I have a lot of fun with Nurse McCoy's chatelaine. Because there were so many things that could be put on a chatelaine, and those of nurses were expected to be particularly well stocked, I can pretty much arm Nurse McCoy's chatelaine with whatever she needs for a given scene, within reason, of course. Some of the best examples of this come up in A Rapping at the Door, since that's McCoy's special story. Before we leave nurses altogether, it's worth mentioning that nurses and housekeepers were two groups of women for whom a bunch of keys at the waist regained some of its former significance as a symbol of authority. A nurse who had a bunch of keys at her waist was likely to be a ward matron, like Nurse O'Reilly, McCoy's mentor in the Tales of Chetzemoka. This was a woman who was in charge of other nurses and in charge of a whole section of a hospital. A housekeeper who had her own keys was likely to be a head housekeeper in charge of other servants. Whether it was the pragmatic chatelaine of a working woman or the jewelry-quality chatelaine of a wealthy woman, chatelaines played an important role in the everyday lives of Victorian ladies, and that's why they come up so often in my stories. I really love the utility, beauty, and almost endless variety of chatelaines, and we didn't even get to chatelaine bags or chatelaine belts today. I'll devote a separate video to them in the future, I promise. Thank you for watching today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a nice thumbs up, and remember to tell your friends about my books. Happy reading!